Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording. I appreciate you watching. Thanks for joining me today. So today we're going to continue working with GUIs. We're actually going to finish up our module on GUIs. And I'm actually going to walk through basically the process of building a four-function calculator myself, or a version of building a four-function calculator, right? Like there are tons of different ways to do this, and you have your option in terms of how you interpret to build your four-function calculator. So you saw one way in the video demonstration that's in the module, and I'm going to show you a different way today, and I'm just going to kind of try to incorporate a lot of other different stuff into this along the way, just so you can see different examples being done. All right, so let's create ourselves a new REPL here, and we're going to search for Java with swing. And we'll give it a name here. And that'll give us our REPL. And so, we saw last time, we saw the, all the boilerplate it gives us. And we said that we could basically get rid of pretty much all of this. Right, I'm going to get rid of all of this private function here. And then we can get rid of that out of the main method. We will keep some of this data here, right? Because we have java.awt star, java.swing star. The other one that we used last week, which we'll use again this week, is the event library. So that's going to be import. I'm in the right window here. Import java.awt .event .star. And you know what? We might bring a WT. We might bring that border library back and do a little bit with borders a little bit later on. We'll see how it goes. But if you'll remember back to last week, one of the things that we did was we started off just by creating a function for our GUI, right? So we started off by writing our GUI and built a function, or built a GUI function, right? And let's build a private GUI, or private void GUI function, because this is going to be a void function, right? We're not returning any values out of here. We're just creating our GUI. And kind of just like we did last week, as we were, getting started with this, we're going to start out by just taking our window, making our window, and start to set things into our GUI. Here, and the first thing that we need to create is our frame, right? We said that our frame is basically our canvas. So I'm going to create a new JFrame object. We'll call it F for frame, and it'll be a new JFrame. And then in between our parentheses here, we'll add a string that represents the name of this program, right? It's the text that goes on the menu bar at the very top of the program. So this one will be for function calculator. And so to get our frame to show up, we need to be able to set the layout and basically set the frame to visible. So we're going to f.set layout. And if you remember back to last week, we did this set layout here. So it would know the layout structure that we're using to be able to lay out our program. We are not using any sort of grid system. in order to do this. We're just using a standard basic just kind of, you tell it where it puts the thing and it puts the thing there. Right, so that is a null layout. And then we will set our frame to be visible. Set visible true. All right. So now if we call that function in our main method here, we should be able to get it. Now we do need a main class object here since we're trying to call a private non-static function in a static function. So we'll create a new main object. We'll say main obj equals new main. And we should now be able to call obj.GUI. And we can run it. And there we can see our little window. Right, we need to set a width and height here. It doesn't have a width or height yet. So that would be the next thing that we can do here. So we need to set the size of our frame. There's going to be f.setSize and pick a size. Let's go 640 by 480 again, like we did last week. We might change this size later on. And if we do, that's okay. So that'll take it from being this little window here in the corner to being a regular sized window that we can work with. So now when we're thinking about what we're doing here for a calculator, there's several things that we need to do. All right, we have a couple labels that we need to put in here. We need a couple text boxes. We need a couple different ways to actually do the operations on the numbers that are being entered. Right, so ideally what I want to do here is I kind of want to have like a title up here at the top. A couple little boxes to put some numbers in, some radio buttons to do some operations, and then an output somewhere. So we'd need an equals button and then a place to show an output. So something kind of like that's what we're going to do. And I think one of the first things that I want to do is I want to put an image on here. I want to put a graphic on here, which we didn't really talk about how to put a graphic onto our program GUIs last time. So I'd like to do that today. And I'd like to do that utilizing the image icon function. And so really all we need is we need an image icon that'll bring our image in, and then we basically just put it inside a label. Right? So before we started the stream today, I went out and I found a little image icon. Just a little transparent background PNG of a calculator. Right, and so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this from my Windows Explorer, and I'm just going to drag it into my REPL project here and drop it into my files window here. And so now it's available inside of my program. I might want to rename it. We'll rename it calc_icon.png. Just so it can be clear what I'm working with here. And now I want to be able to put this in my program here. So let's give it a try. So what I want to do is I want to be able to create a new image icon. And so there is an image icon function, or really an image icon object that utilizes an image icon function or method. And so if we look at this, what I can do is I can create image icon, and we can just call it icon. Let's change it and be something different. Let's call it, let's just call it calc icon. It'll be calc icon equals a new image icon. And then we put the file name in between quotes inside of the image icon function here, which is going to be calc_icon.png. Now on its own, this actually doesn't do a whole lot for us, right? Like it takes it and it puts it in our program, but it actually doesn't show it on our frame, right? Like if we stopped this and started it back up, there's no image icon present. Like we've not really done anything with an image yet. I need to be able to put this inside of a label. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new JLabel. And we're going to call it I for icon. And we're going to set it to a new JLabel. And in this instance, the graphic is going to be the name of our image icon object, which is going to be calc icon. We can also i.setBounds here. And let's try to put it at, say, 10 on the x-axis, 10 on the y-axis. Let's make it 40 wide and 40 tall. Let's just see what that does. So then we can f.add I. Like so. And there we see it. And so what we see here is that our image is too big. Right? It's too big for the box that we put it in. Right? So we need to be able to resize this image icon to fit inside of the JLabel. And this is actually something that's not really straightforward, right? Because what we have here is basically a scaled icon. And so we're able to have an instance of this icon in memory. But really what we need to do is we need to kind of take that instance and sort of transform it a little bit and scale it. Right, which we can do here. So below JLabel icon here, what I'm going to add is I'm going to add an image object, and we'll call it image, and it equals new I.get image. So now we're using the image library to bring in the icon. And this should actually be calc icon instead of I here. So let's move this up here to be directly underneath image icon. And this should be calc icon instead of I, because I want to be able to get that icon instead of the label. So this is calc icon dot get image. And so now I have it in a temporary image object so that I can take this image object and manipulate it. Right, so from here, what I can do is I can say image, new image equals, did I? Yes, indeed. Actually, I don't need this new here. Got a little ahead of myself with that. Don't need that new. So I'm going to take that image variable there and I'm going to scale it by get scaled instance. And then in here, I can add my width and my height. So let's try 4040. And we might change it back, right? Or change it to something else. And so now we can just reset I equals, now it's going to equal a new image icon. But this time the image icon is going to be new image here. So we're basically taking the image, bringing it into memory as an object, converting it, making it smaller, and then putting it back as an image icon, which should still put it in my label the way we want it to do. So let's see this in action. Let's see here. What have we? Oh, I need a fourth integer variable here. Let's see what happens if I do 40, 40, 40. I don't use this very often. It's been a while since I've used it. Let's see what this does. Oh, wait. That is calc icon. Calc icon. I don't know how many times I'm going to get calc icon confused with the label. I want it to be in calc icon, not the label. The label is its own thing. And there we go. There's our little graphic, right? We can see we have a little calculator icon. It's scaled down, right? So it's not this huge icon. Now, we can replace this last 40 value with a scale smooth value, I believe. So that is java.awt.image.scale_smooth, just to make it look a little bit better instead of that last 40 there. That is a constant that's in the image library, and you can see there that it looks a little bit better. And so if I want to make this a little bit larger, I can take this and make it a little bit larger. Maybe I want to make it 50 and 50, but then I would also have to scale my instance accordingly if I wanted to do that. So one of the things that you might do instead is I might take an integer variable, call it maybe iSize, and set it equal to 50. So now I can put that here, 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 and here. So in case I have a change of heart and decide, well, I want to change the size of that picture again, now I only have to change it in one place instead of changing it in 4, right? So if I stop and run this again, we see it gets a little bit bigger. If I want to make it a lot bigger, I can take it and make it, say, 80. Just by changing iSize there. Stop and run. And it's going to get bigger, right? So I think I'm going to make it 64 pixels. I'm going to set it on 64 pixels. And there's our calculator, or our calculator icon. So now we have a calculator icon on our program. Now, if I wanted to move this out, I could do that as well, right? I think that's an important thing for us to think about. is that I could move this in and out if I wanted to by just adding different components as methods. Right? It is a little trickier to do it, right? Because you kind of have to consider, well, okay, like if I do this, what does that mean? If I do that, what, how do I have to work with that? So really what we want to do is if you are struggling with sort of kind of figuring out how to do a lot of this stuff, you can just put everything in the main or everything in the void GUI here, and it'll be just fine. Right? It might get a little messy. But we could do it that way. Just to keep things simple for today so we don't have to do some trial and error and some fixing of things, we'll just go with what we've got here for today and just let this be what it is. So we want to now create another J label that will be our title for our program, right? So that's going to be the next thing that we want to influence here is the title of our program. So let's create a new J label. We'll call it title. We'll make it a new J label. And in this instance, it will be let's see, let's take title here, and we will set the text to be for function calculator, and I'm going to be doing some of this kind of quickly. So if you are watching the recording, especially, feel free to pause and kind of go back just to try to keep this within a reasonable amount of time here. For function calculator. One of the things that I might want to do is set a font, right? So, one of the things that we did before was we created a font object that we use, so we can do that here. We'll call this font A equals new font. It'll be Arial. We'll do font.plain. And we'll start out with it being, let's say, 32 pixels. Right? Might be something that we want to change, might not be. We'll figure it out. Let me move some of this around so it's in just a more reasonable sort of organized order here. So for function calculator, we'll set that bounds for the title. So we know where our icon is located. So our title is going to be located similarly. So we know we're going to be maybe 74. Over on the x-axis, we'll still go 10 down on the y-axis. If we look at our x-axis, it's 640. Let's try like 550 here to see what that does. And let's make our height 64 pixels. And just see what that does. So we will, let's also add our font. Title.font, or title.setFont rather, is going to be A. And then we will add it to our frame here. So f.add title. And so let's see what that does for us. And we might have to go back and adjust those values there on our set bounds for this, but that's fine. And there it is for function calculator. So we can maybe go a little further over on the x-axis. Let's make that 84. And it looks like we might have the ability to make our font just a little bit bigger. So let's try to do, say, let's try 48, see what 48 does, and adjust it accordingly if we need to. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now, one of the things that we can do is align this to the bottom of our label. That might be something that we want to do. Right, so what we can do here is we can take our title J label. So that would be title dot set vertical alignment to the J label dot bottom. And that should move it to the bottom of that label. And we can only, like, it's only just kind of slightly different here because there is a little bit of like margin on the bottom of the font. And probably a little bit of it has to do with the size of the box here, right? So for example, if we were to set a foreground color here, we could actually see, or rather a background color, we could actually see kind of the bounds of the box. So we can set background to a particular color, like maybe color dot blue. And this would actually show us the bounding box here. It would also give us a little bit of color to our program. And I think I've forgotten something. What have I forgotten? Yeah, I think I need to actually import a color library here. Import java.awt.color. Let's try that. Or no, wait, actually I have to set opaque. That's what I forgot. I forgot to set opaque. I don't need that because I brought it in here with our wildcard selector. I need to set opaque and set that true. Because otherwise it's just going to be transparent. So it's going to be title.set opaque true. That will give us our bounding box. There it is. And so we can see that we're probably a little bit wider than we want to be, right? Like if we take and we move our box over, we see we run off the edge of the, almost run completely off the edge of the page. So I can take that and make that maybe, let's try 10 pixels narrower. Let's take that to 40, see what that looks like. Right, and this is something that I will do from time to time as I'm working on things like this, is I will kind of take and make the bounding box opaque so I can see it. You know, this is also a good option to kind of be able to do some different things with it, right? Like if I wanted to, I can add a space at the beginning of my text here, which will push that over a little bit. Right, I can take this and make it black or gray, but let's go with black. And if you wanted to, right, one of the things that you can do is you can look up Java AWT colors, and you can get the color list here just from the documentation. And you can see these are the colors. You get black, you get blue, you get cyan, dark gray, gray, green, light gray, magenta, orange, pink, red, right? And so all of those colors have a constant variable that I can just put in utilizing color dot whatever the color name. So maybe I wanted to do color dot dark gray. It was GRAY in gray there. Yep. And that's going to make that bounding box a dark gray color. But then I could also set the foreground color, which is going to set my text color to title dot set foreground color dot white. So then that pops out. Right? So there are many different, ways that we can kind of utilize this just to add a little bit of pizzazz. Here, as we can also see here, we can use sRGB colors. We can use just RGB values, which might be interesting to try to do here, right? So if I replaced color dot dark gray here, and maybe I wanted like a dark green, I might want to do 25, 128, 0. I think I might actually have to make that into a color. Yeah, so what we would want to do with that, we can look at that in this. So we'd make a we'd have to make a constructor there and do all kinds of stuff. So it's probably just easier for us at this point in time to just use the named colors. So we'll go back to dark gray. That gives us a nice label at the top. Maybe to match my icon there, since the icon's black, I'll switch that to black. There we go. Looks pretty nice. So now what I can do is I can add my little labels for my text fields, right? So let's create a new J label here, J label in1 equals new J label. This will be in1 dot set text number 1. And I believe what we were kind of doing, or what we were kind of going for here, was to, maybe have a label and then have a box underneath it. So what I might want to do here is I might want to in1 dot set bounds. We'd do something like 10, 84, let's say 300, and let's go with something like 18, right? And so now we can kind of see that in action and where that's at. If we add it to our frame, right? F.add n1. So let's add that to our frame. There it is. right? So what I might want to do here is I might want to bring that down a little bit further. And I want to maybe make that text a little bit bigger. So let's create ourselves a new font here. This will be font B. So we'll call this one B. Just to have that be a little bit bigger. Instead of 48 pixels, this will be, say, 16 pixels. And here we will n1.set font B. And we will we'll center this text up. So let's see here. We will add a swing constants dot center here inside of this label. So let's see what that does for us. I think that's actually a secondary parameter, so I might have to just give it an empty. There we go. So now I'm just going to take this whole thing here. I'm going to copy it, paste it, and just adjust some numbers for N2. N2 will be number 2. And I just want to move it over on the x-axis. So let's bring it over to, like, say, 320. And I'll change all these N1s to N2s. And then we will f.add N2. Stop run. Here's our number 1 and our number 2. I also might want to, do the whole set opaque thing here. N2.set opaque true. N2.set background color dot red, just so I can see the bounding box, right? To help me place it. If we were using a grid system, it would be a little bit easier. All right, let's do the same thing here with N1. Just so we can see this, N1, N1. So as we look at that, we see that we can probably move number 2 a little bit further over on the x-axis, maybe say 5 pixels or so. So let's move that over to 325 on the x and just see where that lands us. And that's pretty good. So we'll come back in just a moment and remove those backgrounds, but I think I want to add the text fields first. And just to kind of save us some time, I'm going to copy and paste these from my note. Because we did text fields last week, so let's add 2 text fields. I'm going to add one called T1, one called T2, and we're going to add it at the class level. Right, this way that we can access these text fields in our GUI function and in our action function. Right, so now in my GUI function, I can add some data for this .t1. Right, this .t1 .set bounds, and we could use roughly the same set bounds from N1 here. I just want to move it down a little further on the y-axis. Right, so instead of 104, since this is 18 pixels tall, I might want to change it to, let's just go with 125. We'll add our f.add this.t1. There it is. I think I might want to make it a little bit taller. So let's make it 32 pixels tall. Or we could even go like 48 pixels tall, so we could use our font A. So let's actually go 52 pixels tall so we can have a little bit of breathing room around it. And then we can add a this.t1.set font A. And we can do something similar here for T2. So I'll just copy this, paste this, change these values. So this is going to be 325, 125, 352. We're going to change these T1s to T2. And we will add it to our frame. So that will be f.add this.t2. And we can see, since we made it a little bit bigger, our numbers are bigger there. Another thing that I can also do is take my backgrounds off of N1 and N2 here, now that I'm pretty comfortable that these are lined up the way that I want them to be lined up. Now I am going to use some radio buttons here, and again, to kind of save us some time, I'm just going to copy and paste over from my notes. We're also going to, since we're going to have to access these radio buttons from both methods, our GUI method and our action method, we're going to want to do this at class level. And there they are. Right? Radio button is just JRadio button object. I got radio button 1, radio button 2, radio button 3, radio button 4. One of the things that you might want to do that might be interesting is if you used emojis for your buttons instead of regular old text. Might make things look a little bit more interesting. Right, like so. So I have plus, minus, multiply, and divide. In my JRadio button, right, the first one here is going to be the label for the button. And the second item there is whether or not it's going to be selected by default. So I can actually take this one here and change it to false. Right, and so that will have my plus sign selected by default. And so now in my GUI here, I want to create a new button group. Because one of the things that you'll know about radio buttons is that radio buttons are all a part of the same group. That way, you know, only one of them can be selected at a time. If you don't put them all a part of the same group, you can select multiple of them at a time. So I want to create a new button group object. We'll call it G, and we'll set it equal to a new button group. And that will allow us to group all these buttons together. Right? I can even go through and I can g.add this.rb1, which is, you know, the name of our first radio button here. G.add this.rb2, G.add this.rb3, G.add this.rb4. Right, so now all the buttons are part of the same button group. Now I can set their bounds and add them all to my project. Right, so we might want to do like, say, this.rb1.set bounds. How far over might we want to be on the x-axis? There are different ways that we can do this. I'm just going to take some numbers from a previous one that I've done here. This.rb2.set bounds. And we're just going to move it over, let's say 50 on the x-axis. This.rb3.set bounds. We'll move it over 50 more, which would take it to, let's see, that would be 230. And then this.rb4.set bounds. Make it 280. Right, and there is a way that we can do this here if we wanted to make this a little more sensical. All right, I forgot our semicolon here. Oh, we also need to add them. Can't forget to add them. F.add this.rb1. And for time's sake, we'll just copy and paste this. This is RB2, RB3, RB4. We can see it there. We can see it didn't like my emojis, my plus, minus, my multiply. So I can just kind of set those just as text here as well. There are ways that we can get around that. But I'd basically have to set them up as images, which we don't necessarily want to do here. We don't have time for that. So we'll just switch them back. Now, if I wanted to kind of make these make a little more sense, one of the things that I could do is create an integer variable, int FB for first button, and we can set it equal to, say, 150. So now we can do FB plus 50, FB plus 100, FB plus 150. Right, so now we only have one value that we have to change, and it will move our whole line across the screen. Right, so if we kind of did our math here, right, we can look at our widths. We see 40, 80, 120, 160. But that's not necessarily the value that we want to concern ourselves with, because when we look here, right, that's, we're moving 50 each time. Right, so one of the things that we can kind of look at here is probably more, it's probably closer to like 180 instead of 160. So if I took and said 640 minus 180, That equals 460. So that's going to be let's see, where would we want that to go? And so we'd probably divide that by 2. So 460 divided by 2 would be 230. So that would be closer to where we would start. That there, and that should get it toward the center of our project, which is what we have here. And if we see if we click, it goes from one button to the next one. And it's working pretty well. Let's add our equals button here. So I'm going to want to add our equals button on at the class level as well. So this is going to be a J button. It's going to be, we're going to call it equals, and it's going to be a new J button. And we can just put a big equal symbol on it. And here we will this dot equals dot set bounds. Let's say 230, 280, or let's go more. Let's go 300. And actually, I want this to be wider. So let's go, like, say, 40 or 20. 300. Let our width be like 600. And our height be like 40. And then we can f.add this dot equals. Now we're also going to add our event listener, or our action listener rather, to this button. But not quite yet. Looks like we could put it a little bit higher on our page as well. So it looks like 300 is a little low down. So let's bring it up to maybe 260. Nice. So now finally all we need is our last J label. So let's add a little J label here. This will be for our output. J label. Output equals new J label. By default, the text won't be anything, so we'll say this dot output dot set text is nothing, is null. This dot output dot set bounds. We'll use similar values to what we were using for our title, I think, here. So for our title, we used 540 or we used a 64 height here. So I think I'll use these values here. And we will make a 64 height. We will this dot output dot set font A. And we'll also add set opaque, set background, set foreground. And we'll just change title here to this.output. And so this does show you, like, one of the things that you can do is to just take advantage of old code to write new code. So now we can f.add this.output. So we'll have the box rendered there, and I think we need to move it down a little bit. It's still 260 on the Y, so let's go to 300 on the Y here. So now we have the box there for our output. Let's move it down a little bit further. Let's move it down to 320. And so now we have a place for our output to go. And so now we have a GUI for a 4-function calculator here. Not necessarily the most beautiful thing in the world, but you know, decent. Right? We have a place to put number 1, a place to put number 2, a place to put our operator, an enter button, an equals button. And so now what we can do is we can add an action listener to our button. And so we're going to go up to our main class here. And we're going to say that implements action listener. Right, so now we're going to add an action listener to our button. And let's call this, we're going to call this action performed. So we're going to say this dot equals dot add action listener this. And so now I can create my action listener function. So we will create a public void action performed, and that will be an action event E parameter. And now what I want to do is I want to get the values from these two text boxes, T1 and T2, and parse them and turn them into integers, right? Because by default, they're going to be strings. And so we do that this way, just to save us some time here. We can see we have an integer variable. We set that equal to integer.parseInt and the get text value from the boxes. And now what we want to do is we want to be able to check to see which of these buttons is selected. So we can perform a different action based on which button is selected. So what we want to do here is write a bit of conditional logic. If this dot RB1 dot is selected. And so that's going to take our first radio button here. If that one is selected, we're going to basically take our output text and say this dot output dot set text will be, now that it's a integer, we have to parse it back into a string. So it would be integer dot toString num1 plus num2. Just like that. So now we can see if that works. Right? ideally what we would do here is we'd enter a number in here, like say 5. We'd enter a number in here, like say 7. We'd press equals, and we get 12 on our output here, right? So perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for. And so now we can just take this function, or this conditional, copy and paste it a couple of times. And so we'll just use else ifs. Else if RB2 is selected, well, 2 is a minus, so we can change this to a minus. If RB3 is selected, this can be a multiplication operator. And then our final one here can just be a simple else statement. And give us a division symbol in there. And that's basically our 4-function calculator in a nutshell. Right? So we can run this again. We can see it work. We'll do 5 and let's say 9. So if we have it on plus here, we get 14. We switch it over to minus, we get a negative 4. To multiply, we get 45. And to divide, we get 0 because it is an integer value instead of a floating point value. If we wanted to, we could do some typecastings to floats here, and that sort of stuff. Or you could always just make sure that something like this happens instead. So we get, or we're able to get a whole number. All right, but we can, hopefully you can see how that can work. And there's an example of a 4-function calculator utilizing Java Swing. We're able to plus, minus, multiply, and divide. I probably would want to perhaps change these to floats. So let's just do that really quickly before we go. So in order to do that here, instead of integer parse int, we would just do float dot parse float. Same thing here. We'll fix that error here in just a moment. And instead of an int value, this is going to be a float value, right? Or a double value, right? We'll just use float. And this process is called typecasting, to where we take, and that's where we take one item of one data type and turn it to another type. And so now we can just take our floats and turn them to strings for our output. And that will give us the ability to get decimal numbers. So now if I wanted to say, oh, let's do 7 divided by 3, we get 2.3333, right? I could also do it with decimal numbers here in my inputs, right? So I could say 2.5 here. And we get 2.8 on the output. All right, so that is our 4-function calculator in a nutshell. And so that is all that I have for you for today. It doesn't look like anybody joined me this afternoon, so we won't pause and wait for questions. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please send me an email or a Teams message. That's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.